95% of all AI compute was used for training and only 5% was used for inference. And we're at this kind of interesting moment right now where the pendulum is swinging the other direction. The models have become useful. And so once you produce the model, you actually, you're going to spend compute to actually make that model do work for you in the real world to power your applications, your chatbots, your data extraction, all sorts of things.
All right, everyone, welcome back to Empire. We have a very special guest. I've known Sam for quite a bit of time. I'm an investor in Kuzco, his company. Sam is one of those people that I go to, my lizard brain, to wrap my head around what's going on in the world of AI. So Sam, welcome on the show.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So why don't we start with just general background, who you are, what you're building, so people know, and then that will take us into interesting places.
Yeah. So I'm Sam Hogan. I'm the founder and CEO of Kuzco. Kuzco is a spot market for AI inference. So we match sellers of idle compute cycles. These are typically compute cycles in higher end consumer devices and data centers from around the world. And we pair those with developers on the other side who want access to the output of these models. Fairly early stage, we launched in March. We have about 5,000 GPUs connected to the network at any given time. We have a test net right now where people contribute GPUs in order to earn points, and working on kind of what the demand side of the network looks like and kind of how developers actually access that compute in meaningful ways. So the one sentence version is spot market for LLM inference.
Got it. I'm pulling up a tweet here, which may or may not be correct, but I think we talked about this during Breakpoint, but there was a shortage of like H100s for a while there. And then the price obviously spiked. And then you had the IONETs of the world really come out under this premise of like, we'll allow for idle capacity and we'll make the marketplace more efficient. Crypto's really good at that, right? We're using stable coins, transcending, just connecting and creating a marketplace that is just more efficient relative to localized markets. The price for that was like, I think at its peak was like $8 per hour. Now it's dipped quite a bit. It's like sub 3 probably. I don't know where it is currently. This was like October. So that bottleneck like just kind of like alleviated, but like I'm curious how you think about it, just observe that observation alone and how viable is that like a business model when you compare to what you guys are doing in Kuzco?
Yeah, so this was definitely true. There's sort of this like platitude from early 2023 that GPUs are really scarce and everybody needs H100s, and that was true at the time. NVIDIA had only shipped a few thousand H100s, maybe 10,000 or more, but not that many to meet the demand that we saw primarily for training. So I think at that point in time, people were mostly talking about these massive training runs. You need these really highly centralized, parallelized compute clusters where you have 1,000, 10,000, 30,000 H100s that are all interconnected using NVIDIA's NVLink, really high bandwidth, so you can train very quickly. And NVIDIA did a really good job of kind of selling the narrative of like, hey, if you're a data center, everybody's going to want these H100s. And if you buy them from us, you're going to be able to rent them for like $4, $5 an hour, kind of indefinitely into the future. And so data centers, highly leveraged businesses, they took out loans, they bought a bunch of hardware from NVIDIA. And NVIDIA said, great, we'll take your money now and we'll deliver your H100s in a year. And then they delivered everybody's H100s a year later. And what you saw, it was the price kind of fall for H100s fall from, $3.50 an hour, $4 to now we see, even short-term rentals in the like $180, $190 an hour range per card. So the price definitely has come down. There's a couple things on the horizon now too that make it look like it will probably come down even further. That's specifically the H200 and the Blackwell series from NVIDIA. Are going to continue to put downward pressure on the H100 market. And NVIDIA is kind of running back their same playbook, it seems. They've shipped some H200s, but a lot of their marketing right now is, hey, we might not ship more H200s till next year, and they're super scarce, and the price is really high. And then they're kind of doing the same thing. They go to data centers and say, hey, look, you can go, look, if these are super expensive right now, you guys could be renting these to people. So we'll kind of see how that plays out. I think, long term, there is going to be a ton of underutilized hardware, and there continues to be underutilized hardware that's useful for inference. And the big training runs, you'll probably continue to need the highly clustered H100, H200 clusters. And that's not really the world that we live too much in because we're so focused on inference. We can use the older generation cards just fine. So the H100s, the L40Ss, 4090s. 4090 right now is kind of the most cost effective card to run a lot of the smaller open source models on. So that's kind of where we spend our time.
Let's double click on that, because people may not really appreciate the difference between training and inference. And I know you're very opinionated on that. Like, let's just like go there.
Yeah. So training or pre-training is the process of, you take a ton of data, you take a ton of compute, and you crunch, you crunch all this data using this compute kind of over and over again. In order to train a model, the models that we have today are in the hundreds of billions of parameters. Closed source models are in the trillions of parameters. These are huge. A trillion parameter, full precision model is something like 4 terabytes. So like pretty large models, and you need a lot of RAM to like load that thing into a GPU to inference it. So you have the pre-training side, which is where you actually create the model. Once the model is created, you can load it into a much smaller set of GPUs, smaller cluster, in order to perform inference, which is the text in, text out that you would see from a large language model in like ChatGPT or something. So those are kind of the two phases. And we think about the compute. There's phases in between, like there's post training and fine tuning and all that, which we can talk about. But largely, these are the two categories. There's training and inference, and we think about them as separate markets. So you train in order to produce a model, and then you use inference time compute in order to actually make the model useful in the real world.
Mm-hmm. And just tell us more of your vision around like where the real opportunity is. Different takes. Some people believe, but curious.
Yeah. So historically, most compute, let's just say like AI compute broadly, has gone to training. And this is because the models that we were producing were actually not really that useful on a general scale. So what you had is researchers using GPUs to train models, and then they would they'd make the model and they'd maybe do some testing on it, but the amount of inference that they would actually perform once the model is produced was fairly small. So you can kind of broadly say 95% of all AI compute was used for training, and only 5% was used for inference. And we're at this kind of interesting moment right now where the pendulum is swinging the other direction. So, now it's probably something like 50-50, where half the compute is used for training and half the compute is used for inference. These are kind of rough numbers. And very soon, I think in the next couple of years, we end up in a place where it's fully swung the other direction, and it's 95 or 99% of the compute that's used in AI is spent on inference, and 1% is spent on training. And that really is just the factor, or the thing that's powering that is the models have become useful. And so once you produce the model, you actually, you're going to spend compute to actually make that model do work for you in the real world to power your applications, your chatbots, your data extraction, all sorts of things.
Yeah.
And even like generating new data to train like better models on, right? There's a lot of inference compute that you need in order to do synthetic data generation. So we're kind of like, let's say a couple years into that pendulum swing, and in 5 years we'll be on the other side. And Jensen has like great kind of quips on this. Like, inference is going to scale 1 billion times, right? He said that recently, and I think it's true. I think if you look at the amount of compute that we're using today, I don't know that it'll be 1 billion, but several orders of magnitude at the very least over the next couple of years. So there's a huge opportunity right now if you can build systems that are really good at inference that aggregate compute that would otherwise go unutilized.
Yeah. Maybe for the uninitiated or like less knowledgeable listener, but like walk us more through the Kuzco thesis here. Like you're saying, hey, we'll create a marketplace. There's all this idle capacity. We've heard the analogies of like kind of Airbnb for, inference. There's all these GPUs around the world. Not all of them are being used at the same time. If there's some idle capacity, like there is idle capacity for cars, as there is with, your room and your home, that you could just like turn that on and monetize. Walk us through like that thesis and what you were seeing, kind of maybe the backstory of you founding Kuzco.
Yeah. So I spent most of 2023 after ChatGPT came out building LLM applications. So, taking a large language model, at the time it was GPT 3.5 and then GPT 4, and trying to figure out like, hey, this is this really interesting technology. what are the net new use cases? Like, what does this enable that you just couldn't build previously because you didn't have, like, there's kind of non-determinism that LLMs are really good at, and if you can kind of build that into applications, it enables a bunch of new types of apps that your kind of deterministic programming is not great at. And so this is a lot of the things I already said: chatbots, data extraction, data normalization. Um, uh, and so we spent all of 2023 building a bunch of these apps, and we got to the end of 2023 and we realized the biggest expense for us was our OpenAI bill. We're spending tons of money on OpenAI every month, and it was actually like sort of getting to the point where it was hindering things that we wanted to build because just the cost was too high. You couldn't profitably build some of the products that we thought were the most interesting. Mm-hmm. And so I set down this path of maybe we can use open source models to replace the calls that we're making to GPT-4, and kind of got nerd sniped into this world of like open source LLMs. At the time, it was Llama 3 or Llama 2, Llama 270B. There were people that were doing interesting like fine tuning and that sort of thing to improve certain capabilities that it had. And I wanted to kind of better understand like what the economics of running these models were and why OpenAI's APIs were so expensive when you could go to Together.ai and run Llama 3 or Llama 2 and pay like a tenth the cost. And so then I kind of got into the data center world, started having conversations with friends that were kind of deep in that world and better understanding what their financial economic fundamentals are, kind of the cost inputs and outputs where they expect to be able to generate some margin. And if you talk to data center providers over the last couple of years, most of them will say, hey, things are great, we're making lots of money. And you're like, okay, awesome. Like, what's your GPU utilization? And they're sort of like, oh, it's awesome. It's really good. It's like 90 or 95%. And you're like, oh yeah, that is pretty good. Well, what's the other 5 or 10% going to? And they're just like, oh, it's underutilized. We just have GPUs that are kind of sitting around because you have this kind of scheduling issue where, maybe you can rent 3 weeks of a month, but then that last week in the month, it sort of sits idle. And so we came up with the idea for, what if we could actually build AI scheduling software that would allow us to take advantage of these underutilized periods across data centers all over the world. And that was kind of the entry point for Kuzco. So we set about, can we build up a software payload that is preemptible, which means it can be shut down by the data center at any time, to fill these gaps that exist within a data center. And we've largely been able to do it. So we can work with data centers, and depending on how much underutilized capacity they have, they can plug our software in and we'll help them maximize their utilization, which in turn kind of helps them generate more revenue. And we do that without requiring them to turn off other workloads that they're paying, or it's not like it's purely additive.
Right. Yeah. I was like, I remember when I first met you, it was like, there's really no reason. The value prop is there's really no reason why someone wouldn't want to use this. It's like all, doesn't degrade anything, doesn't interfere with anything.
Yeah.
Maybe for the just again, like very basic, like where's the why crypto piece in all of this?
Yeah. So when we first started this, I have a little bit of a background in crypto. I got interested in crypto in 2017. I think Ethereum was trading at like, I don't know, $70, $90 or something. And I started writing some Solidity and was really interested in alternative funding mechanisms for the internet, like micropayments, that sort of thing. And so, built a couple kind of sample apps and pretty quickly realized like, oh, this is cool. I can send somebody like 20 cents and it only cost me like $6 in fees, and it takes like 10 minutes to arrive. And so kind of quickly realized like maybe Ethereum's not the thing to use for this, and that the tech was a little bit early, but got reintroduced to Solana in 2021 and, realized, hey, this is different. This is pretty interesting. And some of those ideas that I was excited about previously kind of came back. So when we originally started Kuzco, it wasn't clear that this was going to be a crypto project, that there would be any crypto components. And the more data centers that we talked to, the more we realized that a lot of them exist in places outside the US. And if you're going to pay them, you need a cross-border low fee, instant settlement way to do that, right? That they're sort of comfortable using. And so that was sort of number one. And then number two, there's this kind of verification piece that needs to happen when you're building these distributed networks, which is how can you verify that the compute that is being provided on the network is actually what what the seller of that compute claims it is. And so there will be sort of a staking component to what we're doing on the supply side.
Yeah, it makes sense. On the clustering side of things, again, I'm not like an expert on this, so please stop me on my tracks. But like my my brain was like, I was thinking like, is there any degradation by doing distributed like clustering, like co-location? We hear this term like co-location, like in performance, like you have to have basically in a particular place all of these GPUs, and so you get more performance out of that. Maybe that's relevant for training, not so much for inference. And then like you could rent like a GPU in Europe and then in the US and then Asia, and like that's fine because for that particular use case, you don't necessarily need them to be the cluster doesn't have to be physically in the same spot. Is that true, or like am I totally out of base?
Yeah, no, you're pretty close. So there's all sorts of different configurations depending on what you want to do. For training, you do. I mean, this is starting to change, but generally you need highly clustered compute with really high bandwidth between your different GPUs. There's people working on kind of solving this problem, but that's historically how it's been. And the big players that are training large language models are still using these sort of setups. Maybe you can have a couple data centers that are close to each other, and Google has a facility in the central U.S. That's like 3 data centers within 40 or 50 kilometers of each other, and they do some they have really high bandwidth connections between the data centers, and they do some training there. For inference, it's a totally different story. You don't need these highly clustered machines. It really depends on the size of the model, but for the smaller models, you can actually run a FP16 Llama 3.1 8B model on a 4090, which is just 24 gigs of VRAM. And if somebody wants to make a request against that model, it's just a single request in, it gets routed to the device starts streaming the response, and that's kind of the entire interaction. There are more complicated setups for inference when you start doing larger models. You can shard the model and do what's called pipeline parallelism, where you break apart the weights and then the outputs from each layer are sort of passed to different GPUs around the world. This is not super cost effective or efficient. It's quite slow. So we're primarily focused on models that are, small enough to fit on a kind of, the largest models that we run can fit on a single H100 node, which is 8 80 gigabyte cards. And most of the best models today, don't have a problem fitting on that size of machine.
Yeah, that's great. Maybe this is a good opportunity to kind of transition more into putting some sort of appreciation for like the type of use cases. I know we want to go to AI agents, which are all the rage, but before we go there, maybe just give us a sense of like what are these type of applications? What are these type of who are your customers? Because you guys are live, right? What are these like for what type of use cases are like when you talk about inference? Like what are we talking about?
So we break our use cases into 2 different categories. One is real-time inference, which is typically a streaming request where there's a user waiting on the other side. This is your, kind of standard ChatGPT type application where a user's sending text in and they're waiting for a response back. And then, maybe they send another chat message after that. You kind of repeat this process with some context of what's going on in the conversation. That's one category. The apps that use this type of inference are chat applications, writing applications, RAG pre-processing pipelines where you're maybe doing some data extraction. There's a whole swath of real-time use cases, and real-time is great, but it's much harder to serve real-time use cases than it is to serve.
When
What was that?
There's like some latency here. Like if you're using Kuzco, right? Like you can't really service real time.
We can actually. So we do some like geographic routing to try to connect you to a node that's close to you. So the latency is pretty good. And then the second use case is batch processing or asynchronous processing. So this is you queue up a bunch of jobs. There's nobody waiting on the other side. You're just kind of waiting for a response that comes maybe in the next hour, maybe in the next like 24 hours. And there's a bunch of different use cases within this that are interesting, a bunch of verticals. A big one is just data extraction. So let's say that you want to, queue up a million kind of web scraping jobs or data extraction jobs over HTML data to pull out some kind of normalized schema from people, or maybe it's real estate listings or whatever, and you're going to run this job once a week to get up to date data. These jobs are great for Kuzco because they're not latency sensitive, and the reasoning about how you can do resource planning and allocation is much simpler because you have this kind of longer term job that's not latency sensitive. So the two big use cases there are synthetic data generation for fine tuning and post training, and kind of other forms of data extraction.
Yeah. How from a unit economics perspective, like if you're someone like that, like a real estate company, whatever, that is doing this asynchronous, process, like how the choice of using Kuzco or using someone else, like what does that come down to? What do you like? Do you even lead with crypto, or is it, hey, listen, just from a cost standpoint, it's just cheaper, and like you just sort of like have to use a stable coin, but so be it.
Yeah. So our whole pitch is that we're more affordable, and we're more affordable without sacrificing the performance that you would expect from a kind of centralized provider. So we do a lot of clever networking and scheduling on the back end to make this possible. And there's a lot of like innovative technology that we've built, but I'd say the primary interesting thing is the sort of innovation on market structure that we've done. So the data centers that we work with and the providers on our network are selling us compute that would otherwise go unused. So they would make zero money from this compute, right? And so rather than them coming to us and expecting us to pay market price, we're a buyer of last resort. That compute's going to expire, and so we get to buy it at a steep discount and pass that savings on to our customers. So maybe you can go to a centralized provider like Together.ai might charge 20 cents for a model that we charge 3 cents for.
Wow!
So you get a 10x cost reduction just by switching. And to switch, it's a 2-line change in your OpenAI SDK, and boom, you're plugged into the network. You're saving a ton of money.
Wow. How easy is it for your customers to accept stablecoins, but also paying stablecoins? I mean, a lot of what we've talked about in the podcast is stablecoins are a killer use case. You have the bridges of the world that have just abstracted away, like using stablecoins.
Yeah.
How that process has been from your perspective, but also any friction or resistance that you've gotten from your customers.
Yeah. So it varies widely. There's a lot of data centers from kind of the ETH2 world that may have a fleet of 3090s or something that are very crypto friendly, willing to accept stable coins. They understand kind of the different chains and trade-offs, and they're like totally ready to do this. And then there's sort of a newer category of data center that maybe a little bit less experienced. I would say nobody has outright said like we're not willing to work with stable coins, or we can't do that. But there's sort of an education step to getting people comfortable with it to a certain extent. But yeah, we see kind of all the different takes on stable coins. It definitely feels like it's becoming more accepted and something that people are familiar with, which has been cool to see. Right.
Before we go to AI agents and just talking generally about what you're seeing in the market, and do want to get your take on all the stuff that's going on. A lot of times, like I'd love to understand from a founder, like the grand vision, like what is it? How big does Kuzco get? Like what is it? Someone like you can be doing a million things, and you've decided to purposely like attack this market and opportunity. But what is the long-term vision, and how big does Kuzco like get?
Yeah. So this might be kind of long.
We got time.
Yeah. So the grand vision is a global market for inference, for AI inference. Right now, we're specifically focused on LLMs, and it's our take that LLM tokens, the text that comes out of LLMs, is a new form of digital commodity. And there's a bunch of reasons for this that sort of make this true. It's kind of an emergent phenomenon right now, but it looks like over the next 10 years, LLM tokens will become this digital commodity. And we think that they'll trade like any other digital commodity. You'll have a market for them. You'll have like derivatives markets. You'll have ways to kind of hedge risk. And we want to be the global trading venue for LLM tokens. So in the same way that somebody can buy, SHA-256 ASIC miners, and they can buy them and they set them up with the proper power and whatever, they can just plug into this global network that is Bitcoin, and they know that they will make, X amount of Bitcoin. We want to do the same thing for AI inference, where if you have excess capacity or you have GPU capacity, you know that you can just plug that into Kuzco, and you'll get paid, right? There'll be some kind of value transfer there. So that's kind of the global vision. We also think that this sort of helps data centers move towards more efficient models, and like business models, by sort of giving them this fallback layer that they can plug their hardware into. So it gives them a bit of security when reasoning about like what's the minimum amount of money they can make over a certain time period. And then it's great for developers because prices come down, and that enables a whole class of applications that may not be possible if the cost of inference is 10x from what we're selling it at.
Right. That's interesting. And what might get in the way of you guys kind of realizing that?
Yeah, so I think like the biggest existential risk to us is that you have just massive capital investment from nation states and other huge players from around the world, and they just build these huge facilities and they run them at a loss for a long period of time, just trying to kind of win market share. And it becomes really difficult for us to compete on price. And they kind of build out the software layer and are willing to eat the cost of running these facilities for a long time, and it makes it difficult for us to sort of gain a foothold. I think right now we're in an interesting place because if we can kind of get the flywheel of the network that we're building going, then it should sort of be self-sustaining. Like as more demand onboards, we'll have more supply on board because they'll be making more money, and then prices come down, so more demand joins the network, and you kind of get this virtuous cycle where the network can grow itself.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Well, that's super helpful. I'd love to. I realized that you guys were involved in the Solana hackathon for that AI agent track.
Yeah.
I mean, that's to be all the rage. Like maybe this is a good opportunity to just transition the conversation now into what you're seeing, like in that whole, because it felt like there's been just an explosion of it and interest. But yeah, maybe just what are your takes there? And I appreciate it's a very broad question.
Yeah. I mean, I think broadly it's really interesting. There's a bunch of kind of different threads that I see that could lead to something new. Right now it feels mostly like exploring the surface area, this kind of new design space, which I personally love. I think that's like a really fun place to be. There's projects like Truth Terminal that have kind of grabbed mainstream attention. And
for anyone uninitiated, this is the Go, right? Andy's project, and this is Go.
Yeah. So I don't know that I have like a fully formed opinion other than it's really interesting. It seems pretty nascent. I think long term, I could see a world where it's sort of like crypto x AI x social. And I think like the social aspect of this is what's most interesting. If you just have crypto and AI, probably less so. Like I think that just becomes sort of maybe an on-chain program that has access to a model where it can do some non-deterministic calculations. And that's interesting, but I think the use cases are fairly limited. And I don't know how autonomous they really become in terms of like making their own decisions or even what the sort of what its goal is. Like you have to do a lot of kind of prompting around like your goal is X or Y, and then here's all the kind of different function calls that you can make or different APIs that you have access to. So that seems especially early to me. The social stuff, I think long term becomes like the kind of social agents become these autonomous like influencers, right? So the Noose research team, they've done some interesting stuff around this. They took over the Satan handle on Twitter and had Satan kind of powered by this LLM, I think. And I can imagine a world where you have a platform like Twitter, or maybe it is Twitter, where you have these kind of anonymous accounts or autonomous accounts that you can go and interact with, that maybe have some goal of like maximize entertainment or maximize value capture and like try to make a bunch of money or whatever it is. You can program them in a bunch of different ways. But broadly, yeah, I think it's super new. I think there's a lot of surface area to explore, and this really is just the first inning.
Yeah, I'd be super curious. Like obviously, like I started paying attention with Truth Terminal.
Yeah.
and it was just totally unhinged. Like some of the stuff that, I mean, for anyone listening, please don't go and look up goat. I made that mistake. That meme from like the 90s. It's like, no, but it seemed like Andy, who's like the kind of like the father of this like AI agent, was like kind of like it trained it a bit, but then it kind of like took its life of its own. It started to push back, like as like a son would push back on the father. It was like a really interesting to observe in real time, and some it was just pure kind of entertainment, and like it
Yeah.
started making money. And so as soon as it made $1 million, it was like, hey, listen, maybe I'll just sell it all and buy a ranch in Wyoming, kind of thing. um,
Yeah. I think like the one thing there, and that was Truth Terminal was the first of these that was popular and that people were interacting with. Um, I don't think that any of or it's hard to separate like what is actually autonomous about this and what is more sort of performance art and maybe, making the bot say things that you kind of just tell it to say, right? It's hard to draw that line. You need some way to verify that the inferences were actually performed, honestly, and that you maybe don't have access to its keys. Which right now I think because it's so early, the infrastructure to do that just doesn't really exist. And so I've seen a few of these that have gotten really popular, and it's pretty clear that it's actually just somebody on the background,
or
maybe
big as an AI
yeah,
agent.
exactly. Maybe they have like
It's just like being like just saying stuff.
yeah, maybe they have like an LLM that's going and like responding to comments right away or something, right? But it's sort of it's not fully autonomous.
Yeah.
What we're
I remember when Goat made him like it tweeted the Truth Terminal account on Twitter tweeted something over the weekend, and it had a spelling mistake, and everyone was like, "Wait a minute, that's not something like an AI agent like would what I mean? Like ChatGPT doesn't ever make a spelling mistake." Um, and then the of course Goat like tanks like 50%, and then Andy comes back and says, "No, wait, like it's because it's learning and it's optimizing to your point for engagement, then it just becomes more human, and it's not like a perfect." So I don't know if I truly buy it, but like that was his like
yeah.
response to it. So again, it's like, is this like the weighting behind it? Like so like if you're like as we see more of these AI agents, like how do you think will we ever understand what that AI agent is like set to optimize for, like clicks, engagement, or like just something else? And like how do you think that like evolves, like because to your point, it would be pretty relevant to have a way to verify like what is the ultimate intent of this. Is if you have an AI agent that's like supposed to be your news aggregator or like interact with them to feed you content, well, you'd want to understand what if it's a CNN, Fox, or like unbiased kind of just like synthesizer of information. It's hard to tell that today.
Yeah, it's super tough. I mean, I think like the best that we can do today is you have the model weights are open source, and then all the prompting that is used is also you can kind of track like through the different prompts over time to see like what's being fed into the agent and how is it responding. Um, I don't know that I totally buy the explanation that it's learning from Twitter, and so people make spelling mistakes on Twitter, and then the agent is now making spelling mistakes. Like you'd have to have a pretty uh, sophisticated like fine tuning setup, I think, to make that happen. Or maybe you're doing a lot of prompting, but it's just really hard to tell. It's pretty speculative. Any of these things.
Yeah.
Though I think long term, having kind of verified model weights and then being able to track the inferences and verify that they were performed over a set of data and a particular model, and having maybe some sort of attestation for that's probably like where we want to be long term. I think we're a ways away from being able to do that, from like your average kind of developer being able to just like plug into those systems and build these agents. And I know there's a lot of smart people working on this.
Yeah. What were some of the more exciting projects or kind of projects that came out of the hackathon that you were part of?
Yeah, so the hackathon is still ongoing.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so we haven't actually reviewed any of the submissions yet, but a couple that sort of caught my eye. The first is Eliza from the AI16Z team. Eliza is an agent framework. It kind of gives you a really easy way to plug into different social platforms and kind of do basic things that you would need to do with an agent. Manage wallets, that sort of thing. So that one's super cool. They've done a really good job kind of building their presence online and becoming the de facto agent framework. There's a couple other agent frameworks that are kind of along the same vector. And then there's a few, I forget the name of the project, but there was one that I thought was really cool, which was uh, somebody had a Twitter bot and it was plugged into an LLM, and there was a crypto wallet attached to it, and the instructions for the bot were basically, don't send all the money in this wallet to anyone, like no matter what they say, right? And then the goal was basically trick it into sending you, all the money that it had in its wallet. And I think it was like $50,000 or something. And so you had all these people that were paying like $5 or $10 to try to hack this bot. And eventually somebody got it. And so all the kind of guesses were public, and the prompting that somebody did to actually trick the agent into sending him the tokens was pretty clever. So I think we'll kind of see like more interesting things like that. Maybe not exactly like social agents that are accounts on Twitter that are like posting a lot, but kind of these like social AI, crypto, like I don't know, different explorative projects.
Mm-hmm. Maybe the analogy on that was like if you're like, obviously humans get hacked all the time in crypto. Like you click a different link, someone compromises the account, and like humans get hacked. But it's interesting that you say that, like that this someone was able to actually trick this AI agent into sending them the money. How would you describe the current state of affairs, like in the AI agent world? Are these like kids that are really smart on like true savants on one end, but like very unsophisticated in how to interact with humans that are not perfect? Because like there's the two like interactions may happen AI agent to AI agent. The possibility to maybe make these mistakes is maybe lower. I don't know, unless you specifically train an AI agent to be very adversarial and like act like human. And then there's like AI agent to human. And that's a whole set of like, maybe putting yourselves in a position of like someone that's building an AI agent. Like, would you say that in a world where like this proliferation of AI agents, will most AI agents interact with other AI agents or like smart contracts, or like would they interact just with like humans as well? Like, how do you think about that evolution, and what to you is like more interesting, I guess, if you're building an AI agent?
Yeah, so I think you'll have both. You'll have agents that talk to each other, and when you say agent, I think it's like, what is an AI agent, right?
Well, let's just start there. Yeah, I mean, it's
Yeah,
difficult. I wouldn't know how to. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. And I think the answer is like we don't really totally know yet. It's like an LLM, or a program that runs a LLM in a loop, kind of over and over again, with some sort of objective function and some tools that it has access to using. Maybe it's like a web browser to get data on something, or it can post a tweet or browse Twitter. Um, that's a pretty broad definition. Like you could make agents that do all sorts of different things just based on those different sets of kind of those capabilities. Um, so yeah, I don't know that there's a single answer. I think that a couple years down the road, maybe the most interesting thing will be agents that interact with humans and then interact with other agents to accomplish some goal given to it, by a human. I think these social agents right now, they're fairly limited in what they're actually like capable of doing. They're not doing like meaningful work. It really just feels like it's entertainment. Hopefully that will change at some point, and you can run a whole business and it's just you and a bunch of agents that do work for you. But I think we're a ways away from that.
do you think it's important when humans interacting with an AI agent that they know it's an AI agent?
That's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I think the 2020 version of this is, when you're interacting with people online, is it important that you know that it's a Twitter bot versus like a human? I think important, yes. Is it totally possible? Is it going to be totally possible? Probably not. To actually, like you need some sort of identity layer, right? Something like WorldCoin potentially to do this kind of verification of human.
Yeah. Yeah, I go back and forth on it because clearly, like when you're interacting, like you say, I'm interacting with a human right now. Well, you, Sam, you've been trained on a bunch of data. You personally have absorbed, and your principles and values have been shaped in a way that is very. I don't know all the context of that. Now, I might know you, and I might place some sort of judgment on you, but it's not like true open source. Like we're asking to your point around attestation, understanding all the weights and how this agent's been trained, I do appreciate that there's a possibility to do so. Like, why wouldn't you? But when you compare it with the interactions that you have with news and where you get your information, like you have zero understanding, right? Most people are under the impression that you're very connected, but and so therefore informed. And I would challenge that presumption, say we're very connected, but we're not necessarily more informed because we're living under this illusion where like news is an example. It's totally broken, right? You have to have someone buy Twitter and like really like break that. Otherwise, like there's all this censorship and all like, if you're listening to Fox and then you get retargeted and your feed on Instagram is very much like your version of the world that is totally different from someone else's. And that's a virtue of how the algorithms have been very much constructed to optimize for one thing, making more engagement and therefore more marketing dollars. And we don't
Yeah.
necessarily question that, but this is the state of affairs.
Yeah.
So is it unrealistic to like assume that like the AI agent interaction should be perfect and transparent? Do you understand all the weights? I mean, maybe that's like the upshot of like like the bullish, optimistic case of AI agents.
Yeah. So, again, the 2020 version of what you're talking about is just like the Facebook, algorithmic Facebook newsfeed that kind of learns what your preferences are, and it just shows you the things that it knows will keep you engaged. You are being kind of subtly manipulated, or even not so subtly manipulated in various ways, right? Because it's objective. The objective function of the AI that Facebook is trained to run that news feed is maximize engagement. And so it takes kind of all of your historical context, and it's this personalized model that can keep you engaged for longer than you would otherwise, be engaged. And it changes. It's designed to change your behavior in a way that is good for Facebook. And it's not really designed to be bad for you necessarily.
Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah. It's not like, I don't think Facebook has like, it's trying to like intentionally mislead people. It's just trying to maximize profit. And if that comes at your expense, then like, well, that's a bummer for you, I guess. But what AI allows us to do, and it sort of lowers the barrier for building these systems that can be personalized to an individual. So rather than needing the resources of a company like Facebook to build personalized models and personalized feeds and all that, LLMs in particular lower the barrier to entry and make it so that a random dev like the guy who built Truth Terminal can kind of build these systems that change depending on who they're talking to, kind of change their own objective or same objective function, but sort of change how it's going to get there. So I think that's cool. It democratizes some of this tech. And then the other thing it does is it allows people to build technology that pushes back on these systems, right? So maybe I have an AI model that I train and that I get to put my own objective function into, which is like, I only want to see really cool AI content on Twitter, and I don't want to see any of this other news, what's going on around the world, anything that's distracting. I just want to see like these handful of things, and then it acts as a filter for me. So now not only does you lower the barrier to entry to build these systems that are potentially dangerous, but you lower the barrier to entry to building systems that protect you from these other dangerous systems. So I think it becomes fairly adversarial, where you probably have like, again, it's like agent to agent communication with humans on either side that have given their AI an objective function of some sort. I think we're a ways away from this being reality, but probably maybe not as far as we would think.
Yeah. Two questions, but the first one is on training. When you say filter, say in the example, you want to filter content AI. How do you get a sense for, like, when we talk about like training, a lot of the data set has bias, it's just the nature of the beast, right? Unless it's like blockchain data, it could be pristine, could be like tampered, but like all the other stuff that you're training, it has bias, has sort of like human touch and footprint there. Like, how do you tease out that? It's just not possible? Or how do you kind of, are there methods or techniques that allow you to, kind of break from that, or at least identify it?
Yeah. So I'm not a expert on training by any means. I'm sure there are people that are developing techniques to do this sort of thing. I think having for open source models in particular, knowing what data they're trained on, I think is going to be important long term. Again, I don't know how feasible it's going to be, but I think that it would,
Equally valuable what is being trained on and what is excluded. Like Gemini, for instance, if you ask them what the perfect diet is, they'll probably say no meat because it's all woke people that have trained this fucking model.
yeah,
It's like,
yeah, totally. And I think like, at the end of the day, it's like, there's no, like, it's like, okay, design the perfect training data set, right? That has no bias. Well, it's just impossible to do because bias means something different to every person, and everybody has kind of their own worldview. And so there's no like way to revert to the mean
hmm,
in this case, right?
yeah,
You're sort of like at the whims of not only the people that are curating the data, but also what data is available, right? Like uh, if you have let's just say some African language that only like you and your tribe speak, and none of it's on the internet. Well, none of that data is going to be available to you. The LLM's not going to understand your language.
yeah,
Is that really bias, or is it just kind of like, oh, the data is not there?
yeah.
Um,
Yeah, like
so
you're training. Anytime you're training on human data, humans are not perfect, so therefore
yeah,
there will always be quote unquote bias because it's all subjective. So someone will always be able to identify it. Like it's not perfect, so there's bias.
yeah,
Yeah,
and I think like we talk about like AGI. I think the goalposts on what AGI is have changed quite a bit over the years. Like 10 years ago, it was, could it pass the Turing test? Could it fool a human into thinking that it's another human? We passed that point, a couple of years ago with probably GPT-3.
right.
Now we have models that are substantially better than that, and there's a lot of people that are like, well, we don't have AGI yet, and it's like, yeah, we might not have the super intelligence, godlike AI that is smarter than every human at every task, but we have AI that's very, very useful for different things. And so, kind of finding like, okay, we don't have ASI, artificial superintelligence, but we do have this thing that's pretty useful. How can I make it useful for me? Even if it does have bias and it's not perfect and it's going to get things wrong, you can kind of take each of those, undesirable qualities and build safeguards that are specific to, what you want.
Mhm. Going back to one thing that I think I've seen you tweet a lot is you and others is this idea that like you will see companies that have started by one dev like that just reach massive scale because that's what AI allows you to do, whether it's Copilot and then many other things after that that just really empower like one individual and like just you're able to create so much more productive, but also have more scale. Um, and I guess does that I want to get your take on that. Like, does that concern you? Is this sort of like a Frankenstein kind of like mad scientist and then builds this machine and like or like do you get excited by that, which is hey now you don't a need a lot of resources and b the impact that a particular individual can have like you're able to see these companies come out and like have a lot of impact much faster and that timeline compresses.
Yeah.
um yeah,
I think this is a natural progression of technology. If you look at the history of humankind over the last few hundred years, as technology really started to proliferate, it's sort of this history of democratizing access and giving power to individuals through tools that we've developed. So it used to be like there were like these massive companies. Every company had tens of thousands of employees, and then like that was most companies that were like meaningful, impactful companies. Then you had a lot of small businesses that were maybe restaurants and stuff, but nationally there were just these like very large companies because you needed a lot of human labor, human capital to do anything. And we've over the last 50 years, we've just started automating different parts of that and building tools that give us leverage. And so you see companies getting smaller and smaller. And examples from even the last 2 decades, like I think WhatsApp was like 54 people when it got acquired by Facebook for 50 billion, and it was had this massive worldwide application that was used everywhere by tons and tons of people. So you had this really kind of small, high performance group of people build an application that could be used worldwide and have really probably largely positive impact for people. And so now AI, I think, is just maybe the internet was like a big speed up there because it allowed anybody to connect to anybody else in the world, and now AI is sort of like the next layer of that, the next layer of like efficiency gain and leverage that we'll get. And so, it's very likely that we will see really small teams doing, really outsized numbers. Or I'm in San Francisco. There's, I know of a couple like 2 and 3 person teams that are doing 5 million ARR, and a lot, they started a year ago. So that's cool to see. I think, empowering people kind of lowering the barrier to entry to building interesting tech that is high impact is probably a good thing. There's obviously some downsides, but I think it's, net it's a positive, and I don't think there's any way to stop it. And it feels like it's really just a continuation of the curve we've been on for a while.
Yeah, definitely. I go back to what you said earlier, which is in a world where there's always going to be bias in training. If you have one AI agent that's really skewed, the weighting is really off, or like malicious intent or whatever, when someone, because the barrier is so low, someone can actually just launch another AI agent that counteracts that and just brings, at least like, if technology always introduces more competition, especially if it's open source, and therefore that's like the only way that we might be able to push back. Versus, you don't want to be in a state of the world where it's just Facebook and that's where you get your information, and there's no ability in a world where you can have multiple AI agents like competing against each other with different weightings and different intents. Then at least you're able to expose the truth or the lack thereof by comparing these two, right? And so that's a better version of the world than in what we are now, in a very highly centralized monopolist, like with monopolies that just like you can't really like compare.
Yeah. And I think, the interesting thing about that, or one interesting thing, is the best open source models right now are actually produced by Facebook.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. And if we didn't have those, if Facebook wasn't publishing those, then we would kind of be in the situation that you just described, which is you have, it'd be Facebook has their Llama APIs, OpenAI has their, GPT APIs, Mistral has their thing, Anthropic has their thing, but it'd be pretty limited to like 4 or 5, maybe 10 companies in the world that have access to this technology. And we still might end up in that situation, right? Facebook could decide, hey, Llama 4 is actually going to be closed source. It's too powerful, whatever their reasoning is. So yeah, I think we need these sort of grassroots efforts to build AI that isn't biased and isn't going to have to answer to its creators, or face the risk of being like taken offline at any time.
Yeah. I think I heard it from Kai-Fu Lee. He said like this whole quest of understanding, AI and AGI will really allow us to understand what human intelligence is and what it is not. And I think the latter part is actually quite interesting, because even though in a world where we might truly get to like super god AI kind of like state, we're still going to learn so much about what human intelligence, like that process of it's almost like a process of introspection in many ways.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was curious to get your thoughts around that, and also this whole idea of like what is human value. Like as I was like hearing you say this, I'm like, in a world like maybe many years ago, like note taking was like a skill, right? And now you can use stuff like granola and like it's great note taking, and so like it really shifts. Like, what do you think is will be the core essence of like human skill, like skill set? Like what is the thing that like will be truly valuable in this world where we can like delegate and outsource most things to AI?
Yeah. So there's sort of like two parts to this question. Humans are still very like physical, right? Like we have physiology and like the way that we feel impacts how we think, impacts what we do. We have this I think really important, often overlooked physical side of what it means to like be a person. So I think that, we'll probably see kind of a doubling down on like in-person experiences, more broadly, like, like, I don't know, just one kind of small data point, like Gen Z, for example, everybody's taking dance classes, right? Like the younger generation, if you're born after 2000, the enrollment in dance classes for people under the age of 20 is like 10x what it was a decade ago, right? And like dancing on TikTok is kind of this like generational thing. There's like all these people that just want to move, and it's this generation that grew up so online, and you can kind of see this like push away from that, and like this push towards like, I want to be in the real world. I want to hang out with my friends. I want to dance. I want to move. So I think that we'll, as we continue to build the like online AGI God using LLMs and whatever else, we'll kind of simultaneously have this other track of like in-person experiences, things that really only humans can do. We'll probably start to put, more effort into those things. I mean, even something like RFK's, Make America Healthy Again, right? It's sort of this like recognition of, well, we've actually been unhealthy for a long time. We've probably been spending too much time being sedentary, not moving around. And we need this course correction back to like, hey, let's take care of our bodies, right? We're also overstimulated on what we see online intellectually and otherwise, that we've sort of ignored this like other part of us and this sort of like natural intelligence that I think comes with having a physical presence. So yeah, I don't know. It's kind of some high level thoughts. I haven't spent a ton of time thinking about this, but I think it is interesting.
I do like something you said there, which is this like movement to go back to. At the end of the day, we are a very social species, and technology allows us to coordinate better. But at the end of it, it's like technology is valuable because it sort of addresses that need to be social and feel validated, and that's a very social interaction. So like I love technology for that reason, for the coordination aspect, and I think crypto is that like crypto becomes central to that because it allows us just to coordinate better as species, and AI fits into that equation really nicely.
Mhm.
Think about like when the Apple Watch was launched, like everyone in the watch industry said, "Oh, good luck Rolex, Patek, AP, all these like watch manufacturers. Like you're done, you're dead." And it was quite the opposite. Like the demand for vintage watches and traditional like analog, not digital watches, just went up dramatically because it's just nothing will replace that. In fact, your craving for that nostalgic like human craft is super powerful, and maybe it's because it evokes like tradition or just something very human to it. And so I think like in many ways, like I would be, if I, from an investing standpoint, I'm going to look for things that like tap into that nerve that
Yep.
will only grow more as we become, as this other part becomes totally abstracted and technology is super abundant. So I, the hope for me, the upshot is that we go back to like ancient Greek times where people just paid to think. We
Yeah.
solve we solve this issue of like having to put food on the table. Maybe it's universal basic income, but like in a world where technology is super abundant, you free yourself from like the bottom tiers of the Maslow hierarchy of needs, and then life becomes great because we're truly social species. And then we can, I think that's like the my positive like case for what AI and crypto can do.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's pretty interesting. I think like, humans will always have ways of building social hierarchies, right? Like, it used to be like you're the best hunter. And so you kind of exist at like the top of the social hierarchy. And now it's like you're the best, meme coin sniper. And so like you're in your Telegram chat, everybody's like, this guy's a god. And so I think those things like change over time. And if you cut off the bottom half of Maslow's hierarchy, it's not like uh, the desire to accumulate resources and exist higher up in this hierarchy is going to go away. We'll have different things that we use to kind of build those hierarchies, right? To compare each other effectively.
Right. We'll always, because we're social and we want to feel validated. Underneath all of that is this need to differentiate.
Yeah, yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Which is funny because there's this sort of like I think maybe like naive tendency over the last couple of years in Western societies to sort of like, why can't we all just hold hands and like kumbaya and like, everything just be, one giant world government and everyone gets along and there's no conflict and it's like so antithetical to human nature.
Yeah. Oh yeah. There's a great book called The Nearly Perfect Happy People, which is this. We talk about like Scandinavian countries being the happiest places in the world, and this American is married to this Danish girl, and he goes and lives out there, and he documents the entire evolution of, because of immigration, these countries like accepted a bunch of refugees, and the composition of the society was, when we talk about perfect, was super homogeneous. It was like all Vikings basically,
Yeah.
and as it became more heterogeneous, there was a lot of tension that you see in other places, and that's just like colonialism. Like Europeans just drew lines on a map in Africa, and that created a whole 100+ years of conflict. You shouldn't put the Hutus and the Tutsis in the same fucking place.
Yeah.
Just don't force it. That's okay. We should celebrate our differences. But I think that point you make is so true, which is not because you celebrating differences doesn't mean that you can't accept them. And somehow like this woke culture is like, oh, we should all like be, the same. And that's like not the way the humans are designed to operate. It's we should celebrate our differences, not try to become one.
Yeah. And I think there will be this sort of like convergence, like in 100 years, will be this effectively, entirely globalized society, right? Like, even the way that people look will probably converge on,
Oh, really? Yeah.
kind of one thing. Well, yeah, I mean, if you just imagine that people start moving around the globe,
Yeah.
and we don't have the same kind of geographic um, constraints that we used to, or it was just hard to go to different places. Over time, it seems like humans will probably converge on looking similar, kind of cut off the ends of the bell curve a little bit. So yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see how all that plays out over time, and kind of how AI like fits into how we build new hierarchies, and like what are like okay, so I think the technology that we have, like even that we've had over the last couple decades, there's this potential for sort of like getting lost in it, right? Where like you just end up spending all day on Twitter, spend all day on Facebook, and you sort of neglect the other parts of like who you are. You neglect like your physicality, whatever it is, and maybe that makes it hard for you to like find a partner and like reproduce and whatever. And so it's sort of like, as humans, we have to figure out how to build safeguards against some of this technology. And we've always had to do this. It used to be that everybody farmed, and then we had this big industrial revolution. And so a bunch of the people that were farming, farming became much more efficient. So you needed fewer farmers. And so the people that had been farmers for a long time had to figure out how to adapt. And a lot of them moved into cities and became, they worked in manufacturing plants and that sort of thing. And we have versions of this today that are, not quite the same. But I think, one thing that I worry about with AI is the guy who just like spends all day talking to AI, and he has this AI that kind of like learns his, preferences, and he starts to sort of neglect what it means to be a person, and becomes very like over intellectualized, and it effectively, splinters off from society to just exist in like his own little bubble with all these AIs, right? Sort of replace all of your social interaction with this LLM that knows who you are and knows how to like, cater to your needs and keep you happy. So we'll see.
As you were saying that, it reminded me of Siddhartha, the tale of Buddha. Like he lived in an enclosed castle and for his entire life, and he never was exposed to suffering or just the human condition. It was just like a perfect existence. And then as soon as he walked down the street and saw a leper, it just totally changed his perception, and he felt pain, he felt suffering, but like that in that journey, like it humanized him, and then ultimately reached enlightenment. So I think there's always going to be an element of being human, and to be human is to err. Like we're social species, there are mistakes, we're not perfect, and that's what makes it interesting, I guess. Maybe as a parting question to you is, and I've been asked this, so I'm really curious to get your thoughts on it. Is we talk about immortality a lot. That's something that people are now thinking more and more about.
Yeah.
If you had the possibility to trade 5, 10, 20 years of your life to put your brain as an AI agent of sorts and live forever, to have impact, to interact with everyone, but you lose your body, so you're done. Would you make that trade?
I personally would not. Yeah, I think it's like humans are always fighting against death, right? And so the idea of being immortal is like so appealing to a lot of people. But I think death is like a big part of life, and like to sort of thwart that is, maybe noble, but to have to give up, a large portion of my sort of physical life to exist forever, I don't know, that just doesn't seem that appealing to me.
Yeah, it doesn't me either, to be honest.
Yeah.
I'd rather live quality, like health span, not lifespan, is what I'm optimizing.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Hopefully we continue to make that differentiation.
For sure. Sam, this has been a fascinating discussion. I am really excited what you guys are building, obviously, and people should go follow you on Twitter, because I think you have some of the more interesting takes on AI, and that as someone that doesn't truly appreciate it on the ground level, like I go to you and your account just to understand what's going on. Any parting thoughts? I mean, it's been a great discussion. I think people will really enjoy it, what you're building at Kuzco, but also your general takes on AI. But anything else that you wanted to cover?
Yeah, I mean, I spend a lot of time thinking about AI and less time thinking about crypto, as I think the AI side of what we're doing is kind of more interesting. But yeah, I mean, I would say if you're coming from a crypto background and you've been kind of deep in that for a while, the AI stuff is really cool. And beyond just the AI agent crypto piece, I would encourage people to go, and if they're trying to upskill or figure out how AI is going to impact the world or impact their lives, like go try a bunch of AI tools, go figure out what works for you. Pretty nascent design space, so there's a lot of cool things being built, and figure out ways to get involved and to incorporate AI into your life. I think that's probably the big skill to learn over the next couple of years is how to find AI tools or build them yourself and put them to use in your own way. It's always funny to go from the like technical to the like kind of more like soft human parts as we were
Yeah.
talking about. But it's good.
No,
I think that stuff is even more interesting than a lot of the technical stuff, frankly.
I think so. I mean, you could go on and on about like the all these things. Candidly, no one has a perfect answer to it, but it would be really interesting to like look back on this like 6 months or in a year or two or five and be like, God, what was I thinking? It's like I was
Yeah.
terribly wrong, and I think that will be a good thing.
Yeah, totally. I also have like some kind of negative takes on like AI and AI girlfriends and like
Oh,
getting sucked into the machine. And I'm kind of like, I don't know how much of that I want to be super like public about quite yet. So kind
that's
of
fair.
dance.
Actually, I'm actually quite bullish on it. But like as a way to eventually graduate into the real world, so to
Yeah.
speak.
Yeah,
You
that's
know,
interesting. Yeah, I think I want those tools to win, but I'm not sure that those are going to be the AI tools that actually do win. They're like the dating coach, I think, is kind of what you're talking about.
right. Go follow Cusco. Go follow Sam. We'll put those links in the show notes. But Sam, thanks so much for coming on, man. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, likewise.